No one in Chicago noticed the exact moment the world underneath them shifted. It wasn't loud enough to wake anyone. It wasn't strong enough to break windows. It wasn't even strong enough to trigger the city's standard emergency seismic alerts. And yet, at 2:14 a.m., something impossible happened beneath the foundation of one of Earth's most stable metropolitan grids. For exactly 3.2 seconds, every glass surface along Monroe Street vibrated in perfect, synchronized resonance. Not randomly, not chaotically, but as if the entire street had inhaled at once. Then, silence returned so quickly that it felt like nothing had happened at all. Chicago's Seismic Monitoring Center, South Loop Station. Inside a dimly lit underground facility, engineer Mark Dalton sat alone in front of a wall of monitors. The night shift was usually boring, predictable, almost comforting. Earthquake maps were flat, fault lines were quiet, sensor arrays blinked in slow, lazy rhythms. Until tonight, a single spike appeared on the screen, then another. Then all at once, a full system anomaly report flooded his console. Mark frowned. "That's not possible," he whispered. He leaned forward, fingers already moving across the keyboard. The system showed. Microseismic event detected. Zero surface or regional fault activity. He blinked. No quake. Then what caused it? He pulled up raw sensor feeds. Everything checked out. No tectonic movement. No mining blasts. No construction impact. Yet every underground accelerometer in a 3-mile radius had recorded the same vibration signature. Perfectly matched waveforms. Perfect timing. Like something had pulsed from a single source. Deep underground. Far deeper than any subway tunnel, foundation slab, or bedrock survey. Mark switched to depth mapping. And froze. The impossible depth. The system recalculated the origin point. At first it returned a standard reading error. Then it corrected itself. Then it tried again. Finally, the screen stabilized. Depth of origin, 3.7 kilometers. Mark's stomach tightened. He zoomed in. The reading wasn't just unusual. It was wrong on a geological level. Chicago's bedrock layers didn't behave like that at 3.7 kilometers. There should have been dense, ancient granite formations. Stable, solid, unchanging for millions of years. But the scans showed something else. A void. Not a collapse. Not erosion. A perfectly shaped cavity stretching horizontally beneath the city. And Weiss, its edges were too smooth. Too symmetrical. Too deliberate. Mark whispered again, this time barely audible. "That's not natural. System malfunction or something else." He ran a diagnostic check. Then a secondary scan. Then cross-referenced satellite gravity mapping. Everything returned the same result. There was a massive hollow structure beneath Chicago. One that no construction record, geological survey, or historical drilling project had ever documented. Mark stood up so fast his chair rolled backward. "This is to be a sensor error," he said aloud, trying to convince himself. He opened archived data from the 1920s. Old steel paper geological maps. Back when the city was still expanding underground rail lines. Back when exploration was still manual. He compared layers. And that's when his certainty broke. Because the older maps showed distortions in the same region. Back then, engineers had marked it as unexplained subsurface interference, equipment unreliable. And then, mysteriously, every record of deeper investigation stopped. No follow-ups. No excavation permits. No scientific papers. Just silence. For nearly a century. The second pulse. At 2:19 a.m., Mark's monitors flickered again. This time, the vibration wasn't localized. It spread outward. Slowly. Like a ripple moving through invisible water beneath the city. He watched as sensors across Chicago registered the same pattern. But now there was something new. A rhythm. Not random tremors. Not geological shifting. A repeating cycle. Every 47 seconds. Mark's hands went cold. He opened waveform analysis software. The pattern wasn't natural seismic noise. It was structured. Intentional. Like a heartbeat. But far too large. Far too slow. And far too powerful to belong to anything biological known on Earth. The first warning. The system suddenly printed a high-priority alert. Not from seismic networks. Not from government agencies. But from the lab's internal anomaly detection AI. A system designed to flag anything statistically impossible. The message blinked in red. Unknown mass shift detected. Structural compression vector. Non-geological signature. Recommend. Immediate human review. Mark stared at it for a long moment. Then he whispered, mass shift, underground. He pulled up the 3D subsurface model, and that's when the final detail appeared. Something that made his breath catch completely, because at the center of the void, there was movement. Very faint, barely detectable, but undeniably there. Something inside the structure had reacted to the pulse, as if it had noticed them noticing it. Mark stepped back from the screen. His voice barely worked. What are you? And far beneath Chicago's sleeping streets, something ancient, massive, and very aware slowly opened its eyes. Morning came to Chicago like it always did. Slow, gray, and indifferent. Traffic returned to the streets. Office lights flickered on in tall glass buildings. Cafes filled with tired workers pretending the night had been uneventful. And just like that, the city moved on. No headlines mentioned tremors. No emergency alerts were issued. No news stations broke into programming. To the world above, 2:14 a.m. never happened. But in the basement of the Chicago Seismic Monitoring Center, Mark Dalton had not slept. His eyes were dry. His coffee had gone cold hours ago. The glow of multiple monitors painted his face in pale blue light as he replayed the data again, and again, and again. Each time, the conclusion remained the same. Something massive existed beneath Chicago, and it should not be there. The supervisor arrives. At 8:32 a.m., the door to the monitoring lab opened. Dr. Evan Cole walked in, adjusting his glasses and holding a folder of routine reports. He stopped when he saw Mark's face. "You look like you've been arguing with a ghost all night," Evan said lightly. Mark didn't respond immediately. Instead, he rotated one of the monitors so his supervisor could see the subsurface model. The humor in Evan's expression faded within seconds. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "A structure," Mark said quietly. 3.7 kilometers down. Evan leaned closer. "That's not in any approved geological survey." "I know. That's not even in the emergency fault mapping system." "I know." Evan exhaled slowly, then forced a laugh that didn't quite land. "Mark, are you telling me there's a secret cavern under Chicago?" Mark shook his head. "No." He zoomed in on the central void. "It's not a cavern." The forgotten record. Evan pulled up a chair and began digging through archived datasets. Old drilling logs, university surveys, utility expansion records. For a while, there was nothing unusual. Standard urban development history, pipes, tunnels, subway extensions, deep foundation projects. Then Evan stopped. His cursor hovered over a document from 1913. Chicago Subsurface Expansion Survey, Phase 2, Unverified Depth Anomalies. Evan frowned. "I've never seen this before." Mark leaned in. "Open it." The file was partially corrupted, but readable enough. It described something unusual encountered during early deep drilling efforts beneath the Western Industrial Zone. At approximately 3 to 4 kilometers depth, drilling equipment repeatedly encountered a non-natural resistance layer. Engineers at the time had described it as a uniform, immovable formation that does not match any known geological composition. Evan scrolled further, then paused. "They stopped drilling," he said. Mark nodded. "Not just stopped." He pointed at the document. "They erased the project." The missing century. Evan pulled up cross-referenced records. Budget allocations for underground surveys, city engineering permits, academic publications. But something strange appeared. Every reference to deep subsurface exploration after 1914 abruptly vanished. Not slowly, not partially, completely, as if a coordinated removal had taken place across multiple institutions. Evan leaned back in his chair. "That's impossible," he muttered. "Even accidental loss would leave traces, citations, references, secondary data." "There's nothing," Mark said. Evan stayed at the screen longer this time, then quietly said, "So why does it still show up in your scan?" Mark didn't answer immediately. Instead, he brought up the live seismic feed. The rhythmic pulse was still there, every 47 seconds. Unchanged, unbothered, patient. The pattern beneath the city. Evan studied the waveform. At first, it looked like noise. Then structure emerged. Then repetition. Then intention. "This isn't seismic activity," Evan said slowly. "It's coordinated." Mark nodded. It reacts to observation, he said. Every time we scan deeper, the pattern sharpens. Evan turned sharply. That's not how geology works. I know. A long silence filled the room. Outside, Chicago continued its normal life, completely unaware that beneath its foundations, something vast was breathing in slow, deliberate cycles. Evan finally spoke again. If this is real, then what exactly are we sitting on? Mark hesitated, then opened the deepest layer of the scan, the one he had avoided showing anyone until now. A full structural reconstruction rendered from gravity distortion mapping. Evan's eyes widened slightly, because the void was not random. It had shape. A long, coiled structure, stretching beneath multiple city districts. Symmetrical ridges lined its surface, segments repeated like engineered plating. And at the center of it all, a massive concentration of density, like a core, or a heart. Evan whispered, "That looks like a spine." Mark nodded once. "Yay." The second confirmation. At 10:11 a.m., alarms triggered across the lab. Not emergency sirens, not fire alerts, but system-wide sensor recalibration warnings. Mark frowned. What now? He checked the feed, and froze. Every underground sensor in the city had suddenly synchronized. Not randomly, not partially, all at once. The same waveform, the same pulse, the same timing. Every 47 seconds. Evan stood slowly. "That's not possible," he said again. But this time his voice was different, less skeptical, more afraid. Mark stayed at the screen, because now the pattern had changed slightly. It wasn't just repeating. It was aligning, like something beneath them had begun matching its rhythm to the city above. Evan whispered, "Tell me that's still geology." Mark didn't answer, because deep below Chicago, in the forgotten layer erased from history itself, something massive had started to wake up fully, and it was no longer alone in the dark. By late afternoon, Chicago's surface had fully returned to its illusion of normality. Office workers complained about deadlines. Traffic horns filled intersections. News anchors discussed weather, sports, and rising fuel prices. But underground, in the sealed monitoring facility, normal no longer existed. The room had been placed on restricted alert status within 2 hours of Evan Cole's discovery. By hour 3, federal interest had quietly arrived. By hour 4, the door locks had changed. And by hour 5, men who did not introduce themselves were standing behind glass walls, watching everything Mark and Evan did. One of them finally spoke. "Continue your analysis," he said. "No name, no badge, just authority. Arrival of Unit Boreas. At 1847, the facility's seismic feed spiked again. But this time, it wasn't just a signal. It was direction. The pulse beneath Chicago had become sharper, more focused, like a beacon turning toward a receiver. A new convoy arrived beneath the facility through a reinforced access tunnel that had not existed on any public city map. From it emerged Unit Boreas. 16 personnel, armored suits, portable drilling systems, signal scramblers, and a silence that followed them like gravity. At their center stood Captain Ryan Mesa. He didn't look around the facility with curiosity. He looked at it like a place he already knew would fail. Mark met him briefly in the command corridor. "You're here for the anomaly," Mark said. Mesa nodded once. "We're here for whatever is causing it." Evan stepped forward. "You've been briefed." Mesa's eyes flicked briefly toward the sealed lab door. "Enough." "That's not comforting," Evan replied. "It's not supposed to be," Mesa said. "The descent plan." Within an hour, the operation was assembled. A controlled bore drilling operation would be launched from a reinforced shaft beneath the facility. Goal: reach the subsurface void. Goal 2: identify structure. Goal 3: determine threat level. No one said contact, but everyone thought it. Mark stood behind the monitoring glass as Unit Boreas suited up. He noticed something odd. Their equipment wasn't standard geological gear. It was modified, military-grade, signal-resistant, thermal dampening systems, and something else, devices he couldn't recognize. "What are those?" Mark asked Evan. Evan shook his head slowly. "I don't think we're meant to ask." The drill begins. At 20:03, the drill was activated. A reinforced titanium alloy shaft descended into Chicago's underground layers. Rock strata appeared on the live feed: dense limestone, granite, older sediment layers. Everything normal. For the first kilometer. Then things changed. The rock readings stopped behaving like rock. Density became inconsistent. Composition fluctuated between stable and undefined. The drill operators reported increasing resistance, then decreasing resistance, then no resistance at all. Captain Mercer's voice came through comms. Depth. 2.4 kilometers, a technician replied. Continue. At 3.1 kilometers, the feed flickered. The rock data vanished for 0.7 seconds, then returned, but altered. Mark leaned forward. What just happened? He muttered. Evan didn't answer. He was watching the waveform. It had changed again. The pulse beneath the city was no longer uniform. It was reacting. The moment of contact. At 3.6 kilometers, the drill stopped. Not slowed. Not jammed. Stopped completely. Operators attempted restart protocols. No response. Manual override failed. Then the radio crackled. At first, it was static. Then something else emerged through it. A voice. Not distorted. Not corrupted. But layered, as if multiple frequencies were speaking at once. You are persistent. The drill crew froze. One technician whispered, "That's not radio interference." Captain Mesa stepped closer to the console. "Identify yourself," he said. A pause. Then the voice returned. "You dig into what was sealed." Evan's face went pale in the observation room. Mark whispered, "That's coming from below the drill head." Mesa didn't hesitate. "Unknown entity," he said calmly. "We are conducting a geological survey. Identify your nature." A longer silence followed. Then the response came. "Geological." A faint distortion rippled through the comms. Almost, like a sound resembling amusement. "You think this is stone." The drill feed flickered violently, then stabilized. And for the first time, the camera showed something other than rock. A smooth, curved surface. Not mineral. Not fractured. Structured. Like metal fused with something organic. Captain Mercer's voice dropped slightly. "We have visual confirmation of artificial structure," he said. No one corrected him. No one argued. Because they were all seeing it now. The breathing wall. The structure wasn't static. It moved. Slowly. Rhythmically. Like breathing. Mark felt something tighten in his chest. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Nothing that large should be alive." Evan shook his head. "It's not alive like us." On screen, the drill's camera panned slightly. The surface stretched beyond its field of view. And then, a pulse. The same 47-second rhythm, but now amplified. The entire structure responded in sync. The walls of the bore tunnel vibrated. Not collapsing. Responding. Captain Mercer stepped back. "Pull the team back," he ordered. But the technician hesitated. "Sir, the shaft is changing shape." Mesa turned sharply. "Explain." "The tunnel, it's closing behind us." Mark stayed at the feed. He realized something at the exact same moment Evan did. This wasn't an excavation. It was an intrusion. And something beneath Chicago had just decided to acknowledge it. The first words back. The comms crackled again. But this time, the voice was different. Closer. Stronger. More awake. "You should not have opened your eyes here." Mercer's hand tightened. "Who are you?" A pause. Then the final response. "I am what remains beneath what you built above." The feed went black. All systems simultaneously dropped offline. Silence filled the command room. Mark stood frozen, staring at the dead monitor. Evan whispered, "We didn't find it." He swallowed. "It let us find it." And far beneath Chicago, in the vast sealed structure that had waited for centuries without interruption, something began to turn its attention fully upward. The blackout didn't feel like an accident. It felt like a decision. Every monitor in the command center went dark at the exact same instant. No flicker, no warning, no recovery sequence. Just total, synchronized failure, as if the entire system had been switched off by a single unseen hand. For half a second, there was silence. Then the backup generators kicked in. Emergency lighting painted the room in a dull red glow, turning faces into shadows and machines into lifeless silhouettes. Mark Dalton stood frozen in front of the dead main display. Evan Cole's breath came slowly, controlled, but shallow. And behind them, The federal observers who had once seemed calm were now speaking into encrypted radios at a speed that suggested panic disguised as procedure. Captain Ryan Mercer, however, did not panic. He watched the black screen like it was still alive, like something was watching back. The structure responds. At 2041, the secondary seismic feed reactivated on a backup channel. Not because it was restored, because it had returned itself. The waveform reappeared on the screen, but it was no longer a simple repeating pulse. It had changed shape. It had expanded. Now it wasn't just a beat every 47 seconds. It was laid, multiple rhythms nested inside one another, like a vast machine adjusting internal components. Mark stepped closer. "That's not a pulse anymore," he whispered. "That's coordination." Evan nodded slowly. "It's waking up in sections." On the screen, the subsurface map began to refresh itself automatically, even without user input, even without system permission. And what it revealed made the entire room go still. The true scale revealed. The structure beneath Chicago was not a simple void. It was not a tunnel. It was not even a single object. It was a network mass, a vast, cold formation stretching far beyond the city limits. The updated scan showed it extending beneath the suburbs, then beyond state lines, then deeper, continuing outward in branching formations that wrapped under multiple geological regions. Mark whispered, "That can't be right." But the system confirmed it. Continuous structure detected, estimated length, 1,400 kilometer plus. Evan stayed at the projection. "It's under half the continent." Mercer's voice came from behind them. "Not under." Everyone turned. He had been watching silently the entire time. "Through," Mercer corrected. He pointed at the deepest section of the scan. "That thing isn't sitting in the earth. It's embedded in it." The implication hit the room slowly. Something that large wasn't built under Chicago. Chicago had been built above it. Safest instability begins. At 2049, the first physical changes began. Not underground. Above ground. A glass tower 3 blocks from Monroe Street vibrated subtly, despite no recorded seismic activity at the surface. Then another building joined it. Then another. Mark turned to the local sensor feed. "What's causing that?" he asked. Evan didn't answer immediately, because he already knew. The structure below was no longer isolated. It was interacting with the surface layer. Not violently, not destructively, but synchronizing. As if it was testing resonance. As if it was measuring how the city above responded to its awakening. Mercer's voice cut through the tension. "Evacuate surface grid zones of through D." A technician looked up. "On what authority?" Mercer didn't look at him. "On survival." The first structural shift. At 2053, the underground map changed again. This time, not from scanning, from movement. A portion of the structure, previously static, had shifted. Just slightly, but enough to register as displacement across multiple sensor arrays. Mark leaned closer. "It moved," he said. Evan frowned. "That's impossible. Something that size doesn't just." The system interrupted him. A new reading appeared. Mass reorientation event detected. The structure beneath Chicago had adjusted its internal alignment, like a spine straightening after centuries of stillness. And as it did, the pulse changed again. Now slower, deeper, heavier. Each cycle carried more force than the last, and every cycle pushed energy outward through the surrounding rock, not breaking it, pressurizing it. Mercer stepped forward. "We need to leave," he said. For the first time, his voice carried something close to urgency. The tunnel collapse. At 2057, the bore shaft feed returned briefly, only for 3 seconds. Enough to show the drilling team's lost position. The tunnel was no longer open. The walls had closed in behind them. Not collapsed. Not fractured. Closed. Like something had sealed the passageway shut from both sides simultaneously. A technician whispered, "They are trapped." Then the screen flickered again, and a new shape appeared behind the drill's final camera angle. A curved surface, slowly moving, approaching. Then darkness. The feed cut permanently. No signal returned after that. The scale becomes awareness. In the command center, silence deepened. No one spoke. No one needed to, because the structure was no longer just reacting. It was demonstrating awareness of scale. Mark looked at Evan. "I think it knows how big it is now." Evan swallowed. That's not possible. But even as he said it, the data shifted again. A new pattern appeared across the entire structure. Not random, not mechanical, intentional. A map-wide synchronization event. Every segment of the buried mass aligned its pulse simultaneously for the first time. And in that moment, the entire subterranean formation behaved like a single entity, a unified system, a waking intelligence. Mesa took a step back. We're not dealing with a discovery, he said quietly. We're dealing with an activation. The first global signal. At 2101, every unsecured device within a 200-kilometer radius flickered. Phones, radios, traffic control systems, even backup emergency channels. All of them briefly displayed the same symbol. Not text, not code. A geometric pattern, too precise to be random, too complex to be natural. Then a voice. Not through speakers, not through audio systems, but through every connected device at once. Calm, massive, awake. You have touched the boundary. Mark stepped back instinctively. Evan whispered, "That's not broadcasting. That's intrusion." Mesa stared at the nearest monitor. "Identify yourself," he said again. The voice returned instantly. "I do not have a name in your language." A pause. Then, "But I remember why I was built." And far beneath Chicago, the sleeping structure shifted one more time. Not violently, not randomly, but as if preparing to rise further. And this time, it did not stop. The silence after the last transmission didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a pause, like something enormous had just stopped speaking so it could start moving. Inside the command center, every screen remained dark except for emergency overlays and the unstable seismic feed. Red light pulsed across metal walls, giving everything a faint, breathing quality. Mark Dalton stood frozen in front of the main console. Evan Cole hadn't blinked in nearly a minute, and Captain Ryan Mesa was watching the darkness like it was still active. Then the system came back online. Not through restoration, through takeover. The signal takes everything. At 2104, every connected device in the facility reactivated simultaneously. But none of them returned to their original interfaces. Monitors displayed a single geometric pattern. Sharp, repeating, impossibly precise. Phones locked into the same symbol. Communication systems collapsed into one unified channel. And then came the voice. Not through speakers, not through a single system, but through all of them at once. "You have reached the boundary." Mark stepped back. "That's impossible. It's not routed through any network." Evan cut in, voice tight. "It's not using the network." He swallowed. "It's rewriting it." Mesa didn't look away from the main screen. "Track origin," he ordered. A technician worked frantically, then stopped. "Say, there's no origin point." Mesa turned slightly. "What does that mean?" The technician hesitated. "It's coming from below us, and from every sensor that can hear it." A long silence followed. Then Evan whispered, "It's inside our measurement systems." The city starts listening. Above ground, Chicago changed. Subtle at first. Street lights dimmed in synchronized pulses. Traffic signals froze mid-cycle. Elevators across multiple towers stopped at identical heights. Water systems fluctuated like slow breathing. Then came the sound. Not audible in the air, but felt in bone and steel. A low, resonant hum. People stopped walking. Looked around. Confused. Then uneasy. Because the city was no longer behaving like a collection of infrastructure. It was behaving like a single organism reacting to something beneath it. Something waking up. The structure moves. At 2109, the subsurface map shifted. Not due to new data. Due to motion. The structure beneath Chicago had begun to rise. Slowly. Deliberately. Like something compressed for centuries finally deciding it had waited long enough. The sensors struggled to keep calibration as gravity distortion increased in localized zones. Mark leaned closer. "It's moving toward the surface." Evan corrected him softly. "No." He pointed at the shifting layers. "It's unfolding." The structure was not one object. It was layered, coiled, segmented across impossible distances beneath the continent. And now those segments were beginning to unroll like a colossal mechanism awakening after a long sleep. Mercer stepped forward. "How big is it?" he asked quietly. The system answered immediately. "Scale, beyond current planetary engineering models. A second line appeared beneath it. Classification, non-terrestrial design architecture detected. Mark felt his throat tighten. Non-terrestrial. Evan didn't answer, because he was already staring at the same conclusion. Feist surface reaction. At 2112, surface sensors registered a displacement event. A parking structure in western Chicago rose slightly, just centimeters, but without collapse, without fracture. Then another structure reacted. Then another. Not destruction. Response. Like something below was gently pressing upward, testing resistance across the entire grid above it. Mark whispered, "It's close." Evan nodded. "It's under the entire city network." Mesa turned sharply. "Evacuations." "Already in progress," a technician replied. But Mercer didn't look relieved, because evacuation meant nothing if what was coming didn't recognize human boundaries. The voice returns. At 2115, every system synchronized again. This time, the voice was clearer, stronger, no longer distorted by layers of interpretation. It spoke directly. "You built above me without understanding what I was." The room went still. Even the emergency alarms seemed to hesitate. Mark whispered, "It's talking like it knows us." The voice continued, "I was placed here before your cities learned to stand." A pause. Then, "And I was not meant to remain asleep." Mercer stepped forward. "Identify yourself." Silence. Then the response came, not as sound, but as presence. "I am the boundary you ignored." The floor vibrated faintly, not shaking, breathing. The dragon revealed. The subsurface projection stabilized for the first time. What had once been fragmented noise resolved into a complete structure, a vast, coiled entity stretching beneath multiple regions of the continent. Segmented armor-like layers, repeating structural patterns, a central mass behaving like a heart, and a head-like formation directly beneath Chicago. Mark stepped back. That's why the pulse looked like a heartbeat. Evan nodded slowly. "It's not a signal. It's a system." Mesa stared at the display. "It's alive." Evan corrected him quietly. "It's awake." Final movement. At 2118, the structure shifted again. This time not subtly. A full segment rose upward, pressing closer to the surface layers. The city above reacted instantly. Glass vibrating, steel resonating, underground currents shifting in response. The pulse beneath Chicago stabilized into a single rhythm. Slow, massive, unified. And then the voice returned one last time. "I was built to guard what your kind should never awaken." The command center lights flickered. Systems strained. And beneath the city, something enormous continued to rise. No longer hidden, no longer dormant. Just waiting for the surface to finally realize what it had been living on top of all along.